Hey there, Deluxe fans! Hope you're feeling exceptionally magical today. Lilo and Stitch follows the story of a little girl named Lilo, who lived in Hawaii and was being raised by her older sister following the unexplained death of their parents. Now, while the bulk of the film is centered around Lilo and her new alien companion, Operation 626, aka Stitch, throughout the movie, we did meet someone who seemed to be Lilo's arch-nemesis. We are, of course, talking about Mertle Edmonds. Myrtle is a young girl that's the same age as Lilo, and at the time the movie takes place, she was the leader of a group of young girls who all seemed to hold some sort of disdain toward our protagonist. This was especially true for Myrtle. She absolutely detested Lilo. Throughout the film, we not only saw Myrtle go out of her way in an attempt to get Lilo in trouble, but we also saw her bullying Lilo by calling her names that were less than clever, like Freaklo or Wierdlo. It's unclear why, but she obviously held some sort of grudge against Lilo throughout the film, and she was holding on to it tightly. But the big question that we never seem to have answered for us during the film was, why does Myrtle hate Lilo so much? Well, after rewatching the movies, along with the Lilo and Stitch TV series, and combing through the Disney fan community online, we think that we may have found the answer, and it has something to do with Myrtle's untold backstory. And in this case, her backstory, unfortunately, shares a lot of similarities with Lilo's. They say you can learn a lot about a person's history if you pay attention to the way they act and their personality, and in that case, it's important for us to take a look at how Mertle Edmonds was portrayed throughout all of the Lilo and Stitch films and television series. One of the coolest parts about the Lilo and Stitch TV series was how much more time we got to spend with each of the characters that didn't particularly get too much screen time in the films. Not only did it help fans build a relationship with more characters outside of the main circle of protagonists, but it also allowed time for character development. Now, Myrtle's character throughout the TV series is very similar to how she acts in the movie, only with more time for us to understand the reasoning behind her actions and to also show us that not everyone that is around Myrtle actually likes her. In fact, there are a few times that we noticed that the friends that Myrtle surrounded herself with weren't really fans of her bossy attitude and the way that she acted. They even left her to be alone on multiple occasions after becoming fed up with her. Granted, they did typically come back. But still, that not only shows us that they weren't necessarily mindless followers like the films implied, but they also didn't treat Myrtle as if she was perfect and would ditch her when they would get too annoyed. Myrtle, however, did see herself as perfect, or at least she acted that way. This is why she enjoyed putting Lilo down so much and insulting her at every chance she could. Doing this made her feel better than Lilo, and as if she was somehow higher up on the social ladder. Another sign that Myrtle believed herself to be perfect is the fact that she is never willing to take responsibility for her own actions, and instead would rather blame others around her because she wholeheartedly feels like it's their fault, specifically Lilo's. For instance, Myrtle blamed Lilo for the fight that she started in their hula class back in the first film. Granted, Lilo technically attacked Myrtle, but that was only after being cruelly provoked. And when I say cruel, I mean cruel. Some of the things that Myrtle said to Lilo over time are genuinely terrible things. Like the time when she teases Lilo about being an orphan, that's just horrible. Myrtle's inability to be in the wrong or incorrect about something has led her to being in harm's way, and even as far as in a deadly situation at one point. You might remember from the show, there is an episode where Myrtle got an experiment pod hooked onto her bracelet, for which she blames Lilo, and when Lilo tried to warn her of how dangerous the black hole experiment that Myrtle now had on her wrist, Myrtle blatantly ignored her because she couldn't stand the idea of Lilo being right about something. Then, to make things even worse, when things go wrong just as Lilo predicted, Myrtle continued to blame Lilo for everything that went wrong with Holio. Along with being somewhat ignorant, Myrtle was also shown to have a bad memory in the Lilo and Stitch series. During the show, she ran into the experiment known as Reuben on multiple occasions, and each time, she acted as if she had never seen him before. On top of that, at this point in her life, Myrtle hadn't even learned to read yet, which we learned during the episode titled Spike. In that episode, Myrtle was going to use the character Teresa to cheat her way through the Ohanorama. However, things didn't go quite as planned, and after Spike caused Teresa to lose her memory and intellect, Myrtle is forced to take the test on her own, and ended up missing every single question. Speaking of cheating, another key part of Myrtle's character is that she was a liar and had no issue doing it. Not only does she have no issue when it comes to cheating competitions to win, but she is also quick to frame and blame others for any shortcomings that she might have been involved with. Now, despite the long list of shortcomings regarding this character, it is worth noting that Myrtle isn't an entirely heartless character. You see, in the episode titled Yapper, she entered a dog show and ended up cheating to win. However, after Lilo and Stitch save Myrtle's dog from danger, she gives them the trophy because they played fairly and they helped her. This showed that she was capable of showing remorse even towards someone that she seemed to hate with a passion. And speaking of her dog Gigi, Myrtle absolutely loved her dog. She also offhandedly complimented Lilo's mother while talking smack about Lilo when she told her that Lilo would never be as good of a dancer as her mother was. In fact, when push came to shove, at the end of Leroy and Stitch, Myrtle also seems to come around to being acquainted with Lilo. In the final episode, though she still finds Lilo to be a bit of an odd duck, she still decides to get in the giant family picture, which also included Myrtle's dog, Gigi. This showed that as she grew as a character and allowed her hatred for Lilo to fade, possibly even showing us that she was on the path to learning to be nice to everyone, regardless of what she considered normal. And as you'll see in a second, Myrtle might have had a fairly good reason for having such a warped and opinionated view on what should be considered normal or not. Now, we don't get too much direct insight into Myrtle's home life and what the exact situation between her mother and father is, but we did get a couple of hints throughout the series. The series showed us that Myrtle has an interesting reason for mocking Lilo so much. Not that the fact that it's interesting makes it okay, but Myrtle mocks Lilo because she has a very bigoted opinion of what is considered normal and has decided to pay no attention to anybody who didn't match up to her definition of normal. And the really interesting point to note here is that Leroy and Stitch actually hinted at what or who may have given Myrtle this opinionated sense of what should be considered normal. In Leroy and Stitch, we saw multiple instances where Myrtle was shown as having a huge amount of respect for her father, and though he is unseen, it's likely that he was a huge influence on his daughter's point of view. And while they never mention it directly in the series or any of the movies, the main consensus among fans is that Myrtle's parents are either separated or divorced. This is because, in Leroy and Stitch, they hinted that her father wasn't around when Myrtle was taunting Lilo about losing Stitch. Myrtle said he ran away and is never coming back, and that's when the character Yuki chimed in and said, just like Myrtle's dad. And while that was a burn that surely required Myrtle to grab some ice, it was also insightful. Myrtle immediately snapped at Yuki, ordering her to stop talking and to be quiet, which lets us know that there was at least some truth behind the statement. And it's believed that the fact that she can't see her father all the time is why she holds so much respect for him. It's because she hopes that if she upholds his values and is more like him, she might get more opportunities to spend time with her estranged father. In her mind, she wanted her family to be the traditional nuclear family, which back then was more common. Divorce used to not be as common or openly talked about, so when her mother and father separated, it would make sense for Myrtle not to take it well. It would make a lot of sense that she would lash out and bully others to mask her own unhappiness. That's a relatively common way for children to process grief when they have no one that they feel like they can talk to, relate to, or look up to. Plus, it's clear that she was trying to hide her family's issues from her friends, and doesn't talk about it considering Yuki's surprised reaction when she heard that Myrtle had a father at all. She seemed genuinely shocked at Myrtle's mention of her father, and that's most likely because Myrtle doesn't bring up her family much. To many fans that have watched Leroy and Stitch and the rest of the Stitch franchise, it seems clear now that Myrtle's behavior comes from the fact that her parents got separated and she wasn't taught how to properly process that. Some even believe that the fact that she has a spoiled personality could even be connected to her mother possibly spoiling her as a futile attempt to make Myrtle happy, and to hide the struggles that the Edmonds family was going through. And when you start to think about why Myrtle would pick Lilo as her main target when it comes to antagonizing people, it becomes more obvious when you look at how happy Lilo appeared to be despite dealing with a family tragedy of her own. The fact that Lilo was able to handle it without lashing out at others likely upset Myrtle, especially seeing that Nani was still capable of making Lilo feel like she had a whole family. And though they don't talk about it at all, odds are the split up between Myrtle's mother and father wasn't likely an amicable split, meaning that the household was most likely unhappy for quite some time, which would only have made things more difficult for Myrtle. Even though most fans get annoyed with Myrtle and her constant attitude and bad behavior, it's easy to have a bit of empathy for her after thinking about her backstory and her home life. It's hard growing up without a father figure or positive role model to teach you how to act properly and how to treat people, but Myrtle most likely didn't have that, even though she so desperately wanted it. And on top of that, we need to remember that Myrtle is just a child. Sure, she can be taught right from wrong, but sometimes children are going to do things and act a certain way without realizing exactly how much they could be hurting others. When you think of it, the way that Myrtle lashed out toward Lilo and other people that she didn't like was very similar to how Lilo would typically lash out at Nani, and the fact that both Lilo and Myrtle's families wouldn't be considered traditional, with Lilo being raised by her older sister following the death of their parents and Myrtle's parents being separated, means that the two young girls aren't as different as they think they are. I know Myrtle's upbringing isn't an excuse for the way she acted toward Lilo and other people in her life, but it's hard not to wonder if it wasn't the reason for her actions. What do you guys think? Do you think that Myrtle chose to lash out toward Lilo because of her home life and the fact that her family seemed broken to her? Or do you think she was a bully just to be a bully? Be sure to let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. As for now, that's all, Disney fans. Let us know what video you'd like to see next in the comments, and like and subscribe for more magically packed videos.